Just give me a second for it to go live and I will let you know. Okay, it says we're live, but it might take a while to populate. So give us 30 seconds maybe, or 10, just to make sure.
Yeah, it's not officially in yet.
I see something.
Maybe I need to go back and do it again. Yeah, it says it's
Yeah,
live.
on my,
I see.
I can see we're live.
Yes, I can see we're live too. So
And Terry Brown Jr. made it.
yay!
Yeah, I don't see any video on there, but I assume that it says we're live. So there we are. We're officially all right. Now I can see us. Hey,
when
everybody!
Gary sees it, we're official.
Right. What's happening, everyone? Welcome to the Accountability Success Circle monthly webinar series. That deserves an applause. Our theme this month is all about vulnerability. This is episode 18, and it's about...
It's our theme is emotion.
Our theme's emotion. Our topic today is on vulnerability, and it's all about how to effectively access vulnerability in your professional life, because that is not something that you just save for when you're with friends, because that would just be too draining. And I know that used to be the way that things were, where you put on different masks depending on your environment, but we're all about how can you be the best version of yourself. And so that's why we are joined by an amazing guest. It's someone that I admire. This is Jan Keck. So everyone give it up for Jan. And everyone just want to acknowledge the people that are watching live. Hey, Terry. And if you're watching this on the replay, we appreciate you as well. But a little bit about Jan, and then I want to turn it over to Jan so Jan can say it in his own words. Jan is a community addict. He's the creator of Ask Deep Questions. And this started out as a small deck of cards. It was a Kickstarter project. I remember supporting that first phase. And I'm just so proud of Jan of where he's been and where he is now. And now, because of that, he's all about, facilitating meaningful conversations by sharing personal and vulnerable stories. And he's done that, because of his cards. That has happened on just about every continent around the globe. And what is so admirable about Jan is that, his mission is to help people feel less alone by creating these experiences, workshops, and programs. So enough about me reading it. I want to turn it over.
Can I say something really quick?
Please, April. Yes.
Jan, I don't know if I'm having this weird memory, but I remember at WDS we were on a bus on the way to maybe the evening event or whatever at that time, or maybe it was the party that was outside, and we had this little tiny deck of little mini cards that had all these questions on them, and I think you and I were reading questions off and having the whole bus answer. That's the first memory of did he get that? Did he extended that idea? Do you remember that?
That was the truth bus.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
I was like that was part of the evolution of it. So I have a very vivid memory. I'm look at, he created these cards. It's amazing. So, okay, now you can continue with what Gary wanted to say is tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, please. So actually, to really quickly tie that story of that bus ride to where I am now, on that bus ride, I played this game where we just, with our partners that were sitting next to us on this bus that were until that point complete strangers, we just shared these pretty vulnerable answers to questions. The same summer, I took a whole group of friends and people that I didn't know so well on a camping trip. And I'm I need to find something on that 3-4 hour car ride before we even get to the park where we can then turn off our cell phones. We'll take canoes, we'll paddle into the Canadian wilderness and spend time a whole weekend under the stars, having these meaningful conversations and experiences. But the car ride, I'm either everyone is going to sit next to each other on their cell phones or looking out the window or just being bored listening to, I don't know, the news. And I just wanted the beginning of the experience not to be the arrival at the park, but leaving the city. So that's where I created the first deck of these cards for that just had a collection of questions that I always wanted to ask my friends, but never really felt I had the courage to bring up as topics around like relationships, around like challenges, around relation or like your parents, your upbringing, all these topics. And it just turned the whole weekend trip into this memorable experience that I still look back to. Like all the people who were on there, I still am in touch with. And that turned into me hosting events, creating workshops and coaching programs, helping people create more meaningful friendships as adults. And then, of course, a lot of things have shifted in the last year, where I turned more into training other people how they can facilitate these types of connections using technology, which I'm sure we might get into, but I'm a person who would like to turn off their cell phone. Actually, I will show you. This is what I usually create at my events. I have everyone create a cell phone sleeping bag out of an envelope. We'll put our phone inside, seal it up, and then we can actually focus on connecting with each other. And that was the big thing that I was struggling with at the beginning of the pandemic. Well, now I can't put it away. I can't put my computer in a sleeping bag. First of all, I would have to get a much bigger envelope. But also, how I'm going to connect with people. So yeah, I love to experiment in different ways to really create experiences where people feel something. As we're talking about emotions this month in your group, it was always about how can we make people feel something by the end of it and not just think they're attending a lecture or looking at a screen. How can we feel like we almost forget that there's a screen that we're looking at?
Yes, I love that. Oh my gosh. And one thing I definitely want to point out is, yeah, so that evolution. And I again remember when Jan was doing his sort of experiences, camping, and then we were fortunate enough to co-facilitate some stuff at World Domination Summit. That's the conference that April and I talk about all the time, because it holds a special place in our heart, because that's where we first met in person. So I know, right? Have the sound effects ready. But it's very interesting because we're in a global pandemic. Is it possible, to create that meaningful experience? And that's one thing that Jan has been able to do, and we'll definitely get into that when we start talking about like the practical things that you can do. But to kick this off, because we're talking about vulnerability, want to talk about like what is vulnerability. And in preparation for this, I looked up the definition, and it was interesting because I have heard the sort of the woo-woo definitions, that that we've adopted, from people like Brene Brown. And then it was interesting once I actually looked up the actual definition of vulnerability, and it all sort of clicked. And I was like, oh, this is why people are scared to be vulnerable. Because the definition, vulnerable, is an adjective, which means exposed to the possibility of being attacked, harmed, either physically or emotionally. And that is, again, why people are like, no, don't want to be vulnerable. And like why we've sort of set that aside, especially in the workplace, because at the end of the day, who wants to be attacked? However, there's a lot of science that shows that when you allow yourself to be vulnerable, it does create meaningful connections. So want to just take a pause there and open it up and hear from both of you on what are your thoughts on that, and what do you think vulnerability is?
Yeah, this actually resonates a lot with me because like my background is German. I grew up in Germany, and in Germany, I find that in general people are having a harder time being vulnerable with each other. We're more closed off. But then the definition that you just described is almost spot on what the literal meaning of the word vulnerable means in German, like verletzlich or verwundbar are the two words. And the way I describe it is if you were a knight with all your armor all over your body, and there was one spot where you don't have armor, so if somebody pokes a stick in there or a sword, you will die, that is the place where you're vulnerable. So you're exposing this and telling everyone, look, over here, this is how you can kill me. Like you said, Gary, like, why would I want to show that to people that I don't know? maybe I will tell this to my close friends, but why share that with a stranger where I don't know how they might use that information? So I totally agree with, I guess the origin of the word is not the way it's been redefined in the last few years. And I feel like Brené Brown did a lot of the work of turning vulnerability into a strength, not just a weakness. So I looked up one definition that she has as well that I want to share just to maybe reframe it a little bit. And she says that vulnerability is the emotion that we experience when we're leaning into a situation that makes us feel at risk, where we don't know what's going to happen, where we're uncertain and emotionally exposed. And I love how she frames it into, this is a feeling that you feel, and rather than running away from it, we lean into it. And that's I think something we'll discover today, how that will impact other people when they see us do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And April, what are your thoughts?
I feel like, vulnerability, I think maybe that's my middle name, because I think I wear my heart on my sleeve. And I think, one of the things that I care about is that deep, deep connection. That is one of my top values. And so, first of all, Brené's definition is way more positive. I was thinking, we need to just create a new dictionary that has positive reframes of all words that exist out there. But I think, because vulnerability is so tied to the opportunity to get hurt, whether that be physically, emotionally, it is something that, just as we're wired, we feel that it's not something that we want to do. And, I think that as you start to allow yourself to become more vulnerable, you actually will draw people, because this is all the stuff that we say when we're vulnerable is the stuff that we don't want to say out loud because we're afraid of being judged, right? Like, and judgment can be an attack within itself. Just knowing how people feel about you, especially if that feedback loop is powerful. And so, I think one of the things that I think about when it comes to vulnerability and I think why I started working for myself in the first place, is because I didn't want to. I was showing up super different when I was at work. I had this persona. I had to be strong. I had to have no emotions. And I got to a point where I couldn't hide it anymore. And so now being able to have a career where I can live that out, and granted, this is my own career, but also empowering people to show up that way if they're working, in a corporate office, or if they're working in a school or anything like that, or if they are an entrepreneur, to be able to showcase that in their professional lives. So I know I'm kind of probably jumping the gun to our next topic, but I think that the hardest part about vulnerability is just not wanting to get hurt. Who wants to get hurt? and that's understandable. But I think that the risk might be worth the reward on this one, which we'll, I'm sure, talk about soon.
Yes. And so, really great point. So just want to summarize a few things. And one, acknowledging Sophia. Hey, Sophia, who's joining in, another WDS alum. And she brings up a really good point that I just want to talk about, is that, and I don't think that she's alone in this. She points out that she finds it much easier to be vulnerable with strangers than with people that that she's close to, and want to get both of your takes on that. I personally, can agree to a certain extent on that, but love to get your thoughts on why that is.
Yeah. Should I go first?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
I've noticed that too, and I think this is why when you share something vulnerable, again, there's a risk. We don't know how it's going to be perceived. When you take risks with strangers that you might not ever see anymore, I would say the risk is a lot smaller. People who come to my events that show up by themselves and they're just here, like they know we're going to have some vulnerable conversations, we're going to share personal things, they often are much faster you get to a spot where they share something that is really deep and personal than, let's say, getting a couple to agree to share some things I've never told the other person. Like I describe the questions on my vulnerable cards as questions you might not have ever shared with anyone, even yourself. So those are things that you really don't know until you read it and until you share your answer, how people will react, or even what you might find out about yourself. And that can be vulnerable too. But with someone that you have a close relationship with, if it's friends, family members, or romantic partners, there's a lot more to lose in case they don't accept what you share. So that's why I think it's much easier to do it with strangers than close people.
Yeah. And then from Terry, he chimed in and said he feels being vulnerable allows us to show up to life as our truest selves. It's spot on there.
Winner.
And we'll definitely get into that. April, what you want to sort of chime in on that as well?
Well, I think that when I think about, I don't know if I have much else to say because I think that Jan said it so beautifully, but I think that, when you put stuff on social media, there's also that feeling of, hey, if you don't like me, then too bad. But what I did want to point out when it comes to, being able to find the transition between sharing with people who don't know you and the people who do. When we grow up, we acquire friends who we know from just them being their neighbors, or and so they have this view of what we are, and as we grow we still are considering different ways of how we want to be. We're not necessarily sure. Sometimes it takes from till when you're like 30 or 40 or even 50 or probably later. Can't speak for that because I'm not there yet, but you just claim yourself even more because you are more sure of who you are. And so I think that there could be this piece of feeling, I don't necessarily want to cause confusion to the people who I've showed up as. And I think that takes a big leap to say, this is who I am. And if you don't like it, then maybe we're not meant to, be connected as we used to be. And so I think that the real challenge of, is bridging that gap between being able to show yourself to strangers versus showing yourself to the people who know you. I mean, I think too, when people see, how you act, they get used to your patterns and they form some sort of judgment of you, not, because they want to, but it's just, it's a habitual thing. You start seeing patterns and then you say, okay, this person is like this. And so when you kind of veer off that path because you start to understand who you are and what you want, that can cause confusion. And I think that sometimes we don't want to lose those relationships that we've created so badly that we almost don't want to show those parts of ourselves at any point because we don't want to ruin the relationship. So yeah, that's all I had to say.
Yeah. At the end of the day, there's a lot of baggage. And
Yeah.
what we talked about at the beginning of, there's the potential because there's a lot of unknown, and there's a potential to, for the people or person to, interpret it in any which way. It leads us again feeling very scared. And, we're going to talk about the conditions that make vulnerable, um, truly being vulnerable, is still challenging, but, safe for you to like really derobe all of those layers of armor and be, as Terry mentioned, your true self. And yeah, if you don't feel safe for whatever reason, it makes it very challenging. And that again, going back to work of why people choose to wear masks and not be truly vulnerable, is that yeah, there's a lot of potential there. I know here in the States where we don't have a lot of things that other countries have, like sort of universal healthcare and stuff like that. Your job, and especially in this current environment where if you get fired, it might be challenging to find another job just because of everything that's going on. It makes you sort of fearful, and you do put on those layers of armor, and it may, you may not like want to come out because, again, the fear of the unknown. What if I show my true self and then they don't like me and then I get fired? And then again, we tell all these stories in our head of like, then I won't have healthcare. I can't take care of my child and this, that, and the other. So, um, you know, even though there's a lot of unknown, um, vulnerability is still the path that we advise people to go on, and go at your own pace. And we're going to talk about like different degrees of vulnerability, but it's important to just put it all out there that it is scary. But even though it's scary, and I have to admit that even though it's scary, every time you're vulnerable, that fear still shows up. However, you start to get used to like, oh, that's fear, and you know what? It's going to happen, but I, because of these circumstances, want to do it anyway. And so, before we go into the next thing, I would love to invite Jan to pull a curious card, and let's answer that. And for our friends watching, I'd love for you to answer as well in the chat, and we can share some of the answers. So, Jan,
First of all,
how
I
about
want
you
to
describe?
First of all, I want to explain what is a curious card, because in my Ask Him Questions cards, there's 3 levels. So there's curious, which are, I'm gonna hold it here so the camera focuses on the card and not on me. Is just below the surface. Like, I actually have on the box of cards, there's an iceberg, and like that little tip on the top is like all the small talk, what most conversations are, and then all the bottom is the deep, meaningful ones. So the curious is just kind of below the surface. Then the next level deeper is brave questions that invite more personal stories. And then vulnerable is, like I said, the ones where you share things that you might not have ever shared before. And I want to talk later about why there are different levels and why we're not just going straight to a vulnerable question right now. So what we're going to do is I'm going to hold up 3 cards, and actually maybe April, you could choose right, left, or middle, and then it'll be a random question. So that way, just to explain, I don't know what the question is going to be, so I will feel vulnerable just by giving you the option, because I could have literally said, I'm going to bring this question and I already know my answer, I have it prepared, but we're going to leave it up to chance.
I'm going to pick the middle one.
All right, the middle question is this one. What does the ideal weekend look like for you? I actually have not answered this question since COVID, so I know my answer has changed from a year ago. Who would like to go first? Or should I?
I can go first.
Yeah, April, please.
My ideal weekend would literally be sitting on the couch and not moving for the entire weekend. So I live for those. I mean, I feel like that's actually what's been happening pretty much a lot for the last how many months. So I'm getting a lot of good time in. I should probably do some work, but I think I like when I'm not moving, because I'm always moving otherwise. So yeah. Who's going next?
Nice. I'm really craving some outdoor time right now. Like, I'm the opposite of, like, I love the weekends where sitting on the couch watching Netflix, but it's also really challenging when you have a little toddler that is running around and has a lot of energy. So I would love to spend some time out in nature, even though it's winter and snowy out there right now. So camping might not be an option, but just getting away from the city. I feel like that's what I'm craving so much, because right now in Toronto we have a stay-at-home order. We're not supposed to go outside unless it's necessary. Like, lockdown is real, and I spend every day inside. Like, the only time I go outside is to drop off or pick up my son from daycare, and then maybe on the weekends we do a little family walk through the neighborhood, but we don't leave our little bubble. So right now the perfect weekend for me would be, and let's just dream even more, like going out in nature and being with friends and giving hugs and sitting around a campfire and having some deep conversations. That would be an ideal weekend right now.
I think all of our ideal weekends are just to be present with other people. I mean, yes, I would love to do that, but I think also I would love to just not move.
Yes.
Yeah.
For me, I'm similar. Yeah, of it would be nice, yes, to get out of the house. I too have a toddler, 3 year old going on 30, and yeah, ideally for me, let me just paint this picture is that I do have some space for myself to sort of like just sort of prep and power up, so that I could put my best foot forward. But yeah, it would be awesome to go and conjugate with some people that I haven't seen in a long time. Yes, high fives and hugs, um, and do something outdoors, of some sort. I live here in San Diego, where we do for us right now. We're like, oh, it's chilly today because it's 60 something degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is under 20 degrees Celsius. Um, and so it's a little chilly for us, but it still would be nice to go out and hang out, and have some good food in a location other than my house.
Right.
And
Food.
let's see if some other people. Terry said, my thought was spending a weekend back in San Francisco and just walking around the city and hanging out with one of my best friends that live out there. Yes, really miss travel. Sophia's in real lockdown as well, and hers is similar to yours, Jan. So there we go. A lot of community, a lot of gathering.
Nice. Actually, Terry, I challenge you right now, before we're done with this YouTube live stream, to message that friend of yours and see if they reply, and just tell them, hey, I just shared this answer on this YouTube show and you came up. Because I'm trying to get into the habit this year of, whenever I think of someone, to pull out my phone, send them a audio, video, image, something, short text message right away. And it's become this beautiful thing where sometimes they don't get back to me right away. Sometimes they're like, oh my God, this is so amazing. Like, I had a friend of mine who lives in Germany. We haven't spoken in like over a year. Our kids are a similar age, and I just messaged her on the weekend out of the blue, and she's like, hey, I'm actually sitting on the couch having like 5 minutes. You want to do a quick video chat? And our kids got to connect. I got to hear that she's expecting another kid. I told her that we're planning to move to Germany. So there's like a whole bunch of things that just happened because I reached out in that moment, that she actually had some minutes, because we've been trying to schedule, and scheduling, like, it'll take weeks. So yeah, making that a habit is something I'm working on this year.
Yeah, and so that is a great transition to our next sort of talking point is, what are some of the benefits of allowing yourself to be vulnerable? And just hearing, what Terry shared and what Jan shared, it's that increase in trust. Again, this is a spontaneous moment. You're talking about how you truly feel. One of the things about being vulnerable is saying what you really want. A lot of times we hide that for fear of judgment, either ourselves and others. But when you're vulnerable and you really just say it out loud and say how you feel out loud, we're gonna get all science here, and so don't get confused. I'm gonna try to keep it as simple as possible. When you are allowing yourself to be vulnerable, what is happening, because we are meant to connect, is that the other person is like experiencing oxytocin and serotonin. Those are the neurochemicals in our body that allow us to trust other people deeply and feel like we belong. And so that is the first thing about when you allow yourself to be vulnerable. And what I love about what Jan said is that it can be in small doses. Like, it doesn't mean that all right, I'm going to be vulnerable, I'm going to just like vulnerability vomit everything out. It's like, no, let me just share like a little snippet. Jan, before we went live, he was talking about dark chocolate and how dark chocolate, because of it, is just meant to be savored just a little bit, just the tip. So want to turn it over to YouTube.
Where's the sound effect for that? Where's the sound effect for that, Gary? I'm disappointed.
Yeah, I don't have, unfortunately, I don't have
Hope you like
just
that.
the tech sound effect. Yeah, I need to thank you that on it. But I would love to hear from you two on what are some benefits, and for the folks in the chat, this is a conversation. Love to hear for you as well. So
Yeah, and you can go first.
All right. I'm gonna pull up my cards. I'm gonna take out all the cards of the box, and I will show you the quote, or if you can read it in the back of the box. Can you read it?
no, please
Relationships
spotlight. Yeah,
travel at the
Yeah,
speed of vulnerability. Oh, there we go. Relationships travel at the speed of vulnerability. That's to me the biggest advantage of being vulnerable with someone, because it speeds up any types of connections that you make with a stranger or somebody that you're close with. I I sometimes think of the opposite of a vulnerable conversation is small talk, and small talk is just like it's words that don't have meaning, and you don't really get to know another person. It's just like up there. Like you could meet a colleague going to the work setting every single day, and you could talk to them every single day around the water cooler or while passing by their desk. And every time when you do small talk, your relationship doesn't advance. But once one person has the courage to share something a little bit more vulnerable, that's where the relationship kind of goes deeper. You feel more connected to each other. If both people do it at the kind of reciprocating the vulnerability, and you share a little bit more, that's how you travel really fast. And maybe that's also a quick kind of explanation of why there's 3 levels, because we need to be traveling at the same speed. There are some people who are super comfortable being really vulnerable really quickly, and sometimes that is the person that you know as the one that overshares. Like first time you meet them, they lay out all of their problems and challenges in their life, and not that they're working on it or that there's a lesson in it. They just like, it's almost like a vomit of here's all my files, there you go. And that makes other people really uncomfortable. And then there's the other kind of extreme, a person that rarely shares anything about themselves, and you really have to like pull it out on a string out of, is that a saying, pulling it on a string out of their nose, or is that a German saying that I'm thinking of? Maybe, I'm not sure, but it's really challenging to get them to open up. So when we can do maybe a curious question, do a little bit, both do it at the same time, so there is this reciprocity, then we can decide, okay, do we want to go a little bit deeper, and that's how you get to the vulnerable relationship, the vulnerable conversations.
Yeah. And I was going to say that, I think one of the biggest benefits to vulnerability is that it connects you to the right people. One of the reasons why I feel that my marriage is so successful is because when I was growing up, a lot of the boys that I dated, I just wanted to impress them, and I wanted them to really, like I wanted to make them happy. And so I think that, that was the giver in me wanting to just do whatever it took. But in reality, would I do that for just the average person? Who knows? And with my husband, we had been friends for about 3 years prior to that, so there was no shame about who I was. He knew who I was dating before him. He just knew my entire life, and I was able to, whether or not I was realizing I was being vulnerable, I was being myself. And so I think it saves all of this energy of trying to be somebody that you're not. And, out of that, I got my husband, and he already knew what he was signing up for. I knew what I was signing up for when I was with him. And so we don't have to be somebody else. And that's what I love about being one of the benefits of vulnerability, is just like you get to attract your tribe. Because people are attracted to what they see and what they know. And so if you are not showing your true self, they're being attracted to the version that you're putting out. So if that's not really you, and then as they get to know you, that could be an issue. down the road, because they have just like we were saying with the friends that we make, they have this expectation of who you are, and if you're not truly yourself in that moment, you're going to have to then take more leaps to be even more vulnerable and show them that stuff and see if they want to stick around. So
Yes.
Can I just add on that?
Please.
Because I love what you just said, April, and I read this quote or like thing on Instagram the other day that really stuck with me. I'm sure both of you are familiar with the movie Fight Club.
Yep.
What's the first rule of Fight Club?
We don't talk about Fight Club.
There is no Fight Club.
Actually, I don't know which one of you are correct, but what's the second rule of Fight Club?
You still don't talk about Fight Club.
Okay, is there a third rule of Fight Club? I'm actually not sure anymore. But probably you still don't talk about Fight Club. And
What Fight
thanks
Club?
for the sound effect. Yes, what Fight Club? What are we talking about? And I read this quote that said, everyone is fighting their own fight club, but we don't talk about it. And just reading that, like I felt that like in my heart. Like I'm like, yes, we all have challenges. We all are going through something, but nobody talks about it. And that is the power of the first person being vulnerable. Like they have a very important job. They open up the door for everyone else to be vulnerable too. And if you share something with a close friend or a stranger or even like a group that you are struggling with, that you think you are the only one that might be struggling with that certain issue, then suddenly everyone else gets the opportunity to say, hey, me too, I also struggle with this. And it's this incredible feeling of not feeling alone, of feeling the sense of belonging. And that's kind of what my whole mission is when I create events. I'm always thinking of how can I make people feel that at the very end, so they realize, oh, I'm not the only one. I'm actually surrounded by people that are like me.
Yes. And to that point, because I know there's a lot of like sort of apprehension on being vulnerable at work. And hopefully by watching this, you understand that you can do it in small doses and it's not like a big thing. But one of the cool things about creating a space where vulnerability is accepted is just that. You can find out that, oh, we are more alike than we are different. Jan brought up an amazing point. And I, again, in some of my earlier jobs in my career, I can attest to this, is that you can work with someone for years. And if all that you're doing is having small talk and surface level conversations, you don't really know them. But when you create that space where vulnerability can thrive and people feel safe being vulnerable, you get that connection. One of the other benefits of being vulnerable is that resolutions can happen quicker. Again, having a space for vulnerability doesn't mean that it's all going to be sunshine and rainbows. It just means that you feel comfortable expressing how you feel and what you want. And if someone says something that maybe you don't agree with or hurt your feelings or whatever the case may be, because there's that safe space for people to speak up, you can address it and it can get resolved, because a lot of times there's a lot of misinterpretation. However, the status quo is that, oh, I gotta be professional. I probably shouldn't talk about this or something like that. And then it just goes unnoticed. And maybe that's where passive aggressive and stuff like that comes from. So vulnerability has some amazing benefits. And then because of essence of time, I want to, talk about and leave open the space of how can someone, go vulnerable or make that progress. And I know like Jan, like you have some amazing tips there. So I'd love to start with you first.
So the question is, how can we start to be vulnerable?
Yeah. What some steps can we start to take to show that vulnerability? Especially if you want to attract the tribe and all of that stuff. And maybe we've only been doing the small talk and stuff like that prior, but we're ready for that courage. So what can we do?
And I think too, and how it pertains to the places where we struggle to be more vulnerable, like the workplace, or as Sophia was saying, like people who we already have an established relationship with that we struggle to be vulnerable with. Like what is that first step?
I actually want to like mention and have everyone think about that vulnerability is different for everyone. So if even I share now, here's one vulnerable thing that I did for somebody else, that might not be a big deal. But for them, maybe something else could be really vulnerable. And I was thinking of what are some things that could be considered vulnerable for some and not for others. So just showing up for your first day at work, not knowing anyone, could be really vulnerable for some people. Like remembering first day of school, maybe you didn't have a lot of friends and that first day of school was really traumatic, then first day of work will be really vulnerable for one person. For somebody who's super outgoing, extroverted, loves meeting new people, that could be not vulnerable at all. Same thing as like saying I love you to your partner. The first time it might be super vulnerable, but then after you've been like in a relationship for years and married, there's no vulnerability left. Like you say it every day and you mean it. And just thinking about there are all these different levels and every person chooses their own level. So I would say the first thing that comes to my mind when you want to practice being vulnerable is doing it in I know, Gary, you said a safe space. I actually like thinking of it as a brave space, because safe space to me means we're not going to be uncomfortable. And vulnerability, just by definition, means we're going to be uncomfortable. And a brave space to me is you feel supported to be in that uncomfortable space, to step outside of your comfort zone. So thinking of who are the people you can have this brave space with, like maybe it is not your whole team at work, maybe it's just one person that you're just going to get your feet wet and you're going to share something that feels a little bit vulnerable and see how it's received. See if they reciprocate, if they share something too. If it goes well, that's great. Then you can see if you can share a little bit more. But don't, I don't know, call a team meeting and then in front of everyone share something really personal, really vulnerable, and expect that will solve all of your problems. So practice in a space where you can feel safe and supported first, and then build that confidence. So when there's other opportunities, you're more likely to then do it.
I love that.
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to say when it comes to, just because I care a lot about self-expression and being your true self. And this has been a big part of my process because I've always wanted to be the person who everybody liked and whatnot. And it caused a lot of issue for me later on down the road. But one of the things that because I look at vulnerability as a way to connect. I have most of my life felt super judged. People will look at me and make assumptions or know something about me and make assumptions. And I'm one of those people, or at least I feel that I can't even live just one label because there's so much complexity that is my life. And so one example that I was vulnerable, and this is kind of at my level of vulnerability, but had to wait until the age of 40 to feel super comfortable to do that, is I always feel awkward in first interactions, and I don't like that people form a judgment of me before I even open my mouth. And so I got tattoos with my, I know this comes up in conversation a lot, but this is a super vulnerable thing for me to put things on my body to say, these are my values. And if you just see me walking by, tattoos can make a statement, right? Without even having to say anything. And so you read the words fun, connection, authenticity, and accomplishment. Like those are the things that I stand by. And then the cheerful AF on my back, like that kind of tells you who I am as a person. And I don't really need to say anything, but it is one level of being vulnerable, and maybe a little bit more on the complex side. But that was a way where I just didn't need to open my mouth, because hopefully those tattoos could speak for themselves. But it does give you that window into who I am as a person. So I just wanted to share that as an example of something that I did to feel like I can connect, because I feel super awkward when I'm at networking events and people don't know me, or they all of that. So and Jan, I know that you need to head out soon, and we're going to keep the conversation going, but we wanted to thank you so much for being here.
But I don't want to go yet.
Okay, then stay.
I will stay for one more round of conversation.
Okay,
I just
good.
have another call that I don't need to prepare as much as I thought, so
Okay, cool.
you get a couple of bonus minutes.
Yay!
Yay! That is worth some celebration. So, yay!
Like, I love
Uh,
it.
so one thing I just want to point out, hearing what Jan said and what April said. Oh, go ahead, do it, please. I love that. Oh, 1, 2, 3. Time is slightly off, but yes, now we have props. Um, it's one of those things. If you have to sort of hold back, and Brene Brown says it very perfectly. Having that armor on, protecting yourself, you're not allowing yourself to be truly human, because when you do that, you're cutting off the good and the bad. It's almost like you're sort of muting both ends of the spectrum. You're not going to be able to truly like love and feel compassion and happiness and joy and all these other things. And yes, you are cutting off the potential to like feel hurt and things like that. And is that why we're here? And again, because we're talking about vulnerability, especially in a workplace scenario, think of it like this. Um, uh, in your adult life, forgive me, I don't know the exact number of things, but like you're going to spend a large percentage of your adult life potentially working, and if you're like, working in like sort of like a sort of work environment with other people, that's a lot of time. And imagine spending a lot of that time not allowing yourself to be your true self. So that is something I just want to put that out there. And I love what Jan said about creating a brave space, because vulnerability, um, depending on what your level of vulnerability is and you know what that action is, it's gonna feel scary. But if you allow yourself to be brave, you can take those steps, and then you can reap the benefits. So one thing I want to sort of turn it over. So we talked about some of the things that you can do to like start, becoming vulnerable. Um, what what I want to do is, and I want to hear from both of you of how do you find that balance?
Yeah, I don't. Jan, you want to go first, or you want me to?
I'll go just because maybe I will have to drop off before the end of this conversation because that's a big, big topic.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to give advice on that question, so maybe I'll share what I'm thinking about when it comes to vulnerability. The first thing always is not everyone deserves your vulnerability. Like you don't have to be vulnerable with everyone. Like people earn it, or you already have that trust with them that they're deserving of it. At least that's what I'm thinking of. Like when somebody asks me a question and I'm not in a space where I want to be vulnerable, I'm not going to be vulnerable. That's a great thing. Even like with any question, you can always choose which direction you go. You could give a surface level answer. You can go a little bit deeper. I just by practicing this for the last few years often go a little bit deeper than I have gone in the past. And most of the time it works out. But like what April was saying earlier, thinking of networking events, I just changed the types of conversations I was having. Even if somebody asked me a small talk question, I would give them a deep, meaningful, sometimes slightly vulnerable answer. And very quickly I would realize, okay, that person basically just left after I said this, which I was so thankful of because that would have been a very boring conversation with someone that I probably had nothing in common with. So I just sped up the whole process of like weeding out who are my people and who are the others. And oftentimes, especially networking events, my goal is not to talk to everyone or a lot of people. My goal is to have one deep conversation. And until I find that person, I'm just going to drop these lines in the water, see who bites. And if they don't bite, I'll move on to the next person. And then once I catch something, that's where I will spend my time investing. So that's maybe one tip that I could share.
I love that. I should reframe how I do networking events by doing that. And that's what I do anyways, but I think that I don't really always know what my goal is. So I think that that's good. That's amazing. Gary, how about you?
Uh, I I feel like Jan, nailed it, talking about not everyone deserves your level of vulnerability. One thing that I heard Brene Brown talk about, and it's interesting because I had something similar, and I was like, "Oh, this makes sense." So she was talking to her daughter about when to be vulnerable, when to share, that things, and it's all about trust. Of because there is a lot of unknown, and you don't know how people are going to respond, so you don't need to give that energy out to everyone. And in school, her daughter had something similar that I had when I was in school. The teacher would have this jar, and every time we do good things, she would add like another like sort of coin or ball or trinket or something in that jar. And once it fills up to a certain level, then we get prizes. And Brene talked about this with everyone. You need to have your barometer, and when it's like this trust jar, and they do things to earn your trust. They get another trinket in there, and then when you feel like, all right, there's enough level of trust there, then I can maybe be a little bit more vulnerable. If they do something to take away that trust, it starts to go down. And so everyone has their own barometer. And you need to start to think about that, and, think about like, oh, you know what? Um, someone that I work with, I truly trust them. Maybe I'm going to be a little bit more vulnerable with that person. Someone that, maybe is family. And that's the interesting thing. Like we have these labels, family, as in we're supposed to feel like, oh yeah, they're family. That means I should be able to tell them anything and everything. That's not always the case. So I would like to say, let's take that out of the equation. Just because they're your birth family doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be vulnerable with them. And maybe you just have like little baby steps. So that's my thing on having that balance.
I wanted to say, in terms of, figuring out where to draw the line, I think a lot of times you can immerse yourself in a situation and, assess how brave the space is, and then, deciding when you can speak. But I talk about this all the time because I feel like it literally is the thing that gives you the compass on where to go. But if you are able to identify, let's say this is your employer, and like, how vulnerable can I get, or am I allowed to, where do I draw the line, and what do I share and not share? You can look at the company's mission, the company's values, and just get a sense of the type of culture that you're in. And depending on how your own personal values align with that company's, that can kind of give you that barometer, right? So if everything is all about put your head down and just get to work, and we are like efficient and driven, you might not want to talk about things that are going to slow things down. And so I think it just gives you a better checkpoint on what you can share, right? I mean, if you have to be professional and, maybe, like, let's say, I do substitute teaching, and I just think about, what would be a good role model for children. And even though my tattoos don't say anything that is offensive, I also just don't want that to distract the education, which is the priority. And so I will wear long sleeves. And it's not to hide who I am, but it's just to honor the values of the place that I'm at. So I'm not trying to, be like, hey, I'm kind of like, fancy, and I got these tattoos and you should do that too. Like, I'm really thinking about the children. And so that can give you a good barometer of how much you should share versus not. But it shouldn't ever be meant to be like, oh, I'm going to hide myself. I'm going to just kind of fit the mold, but still honor who I am inside. So, and now, yeah. And now, Jan, you have to go.
Yeah. So
now I really have to go. Yes.
Jan, before you go, I just want to take a moment to just acknowledge you and say we super appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend time with us to talk about this topic of vulnerability. We've seen you make leaps and bounds in this area, and so we appreciate you. Thank you for being on our show.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Hang on, you're gonna get a beating heart from me. Thank you for creating this space and conversations around this topic. It's something that I can spend probably a couple more hours talking about. So, Sophia, Terry, thanks for joining in. And yeah, if anybody else wants to reach out after this, please feel free to
Yes.
tag
For
me,
those of
message
you
me.
who are in the ASC, and I'll explain all of that too. You know how his website is in the so see you later, Jan. His website is available, and if you are a member of the Accountability Success Circle, you could hang out and reach him directly. And so that's that. But I guess I think as we're starting to wrap up, since we've got about 5 minutes left, I wanted to make sure that we kind of package, like we always do, package this hour-long conversation into a nice little bite size. So if you are, just watching this and want to know, okay, what did they just talk about for an hour? What are the things that we don't want them, we want them to take away if they're only listening to the last 5 minutes? So, Gary, where do you think we should start?
Yes. So, all right. We got to jump into it. I think the main thing, start with this, is what vulnerability is. Yes, vulnerability, the old way, it was sort of protecting yourself from potential danger that could happen. And so that is why people see vulnerability or did see it as a weakness, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of unknowns. But why it's important, as we heard Jan say, April say, I mention it, is it does create a sense of connection. It allows you to trust each other deeply. It allows you to, be seen as your true self. And there's a lot of benefits, especially at work, especially around creating that safe, brave space. Forgive me, brave space, and being able to feel all the emotions, the joy, and it comes with the sorrow and stuff like that. But you can the whole spectrum of emotions. So that's the first thing, and then as far as being vulnerable, it's not for everyone, as in you don't have to allow yourself to be vulnerable for everyone. You get a choice of who you allow yourself to be vulnerable with. And that should, depend on your level of comfort, but just know that because it is a brave space, it's going to require, some effort on your part. Fear will show up. But if someone you just met, maybe, you don't immediately tell them your deepest, darkest, secrets. As Jan said with his Ask Deep Questions card, you slightly go under the surface and add, deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until you just feel comfortable sharing anything and everything, because it's a safe space. So, what do you got, April?
I think one of the things that I want to make sure that you all remember, and maybe I didn't even say this before, but if you're watching this last 5 minutes, this is super important. I think that you don't always need to say certain things to be vulnerable, right? And I think that it's really important to know that being vulnerable isn't like letting out a sob story or something like that. It's not about like connecting people and having them feel empathy for you or anything like that. It's just allowing people to see the real you. And it doesn't need to be outlandish like my tattoos, right? I was saying, like, my level of vulnerability is very high. I do that with strangers. I do that with, the people that I surround myself with as much as I can, because I want to be self-expressed. But the end goal is to be able to show who you are truly. And not as Gary and Jan were mentioning, not everybody needs to see that. But when you feel empowered to, let that part of you shine through. And it doesn't need to be something that you say. Vulnerability can be multiple different kinds of actions, right? It can be an emotion that you're showing to somebody. It can also be something that you say, or something that you display. I mean, it could even just be that, if you are a fun and playful guy, and you like you're trying to be professional, but you like love to play, you might have a sign behind you that says play, or just, little trinkets on your desk that might just show a little bit of who you are without having to say anything, in your workspace, right? That, people have, you're in this office and maybe there are certain things that you might not be going out and like cracking jokes or whatever, doing magic tricks at meetings, but you could have certain things that kind of give people the invitation to maybe want to know more if they choose to. So allow yourself to just try small things, to be vulnerable. Allow yourself, it could be in the clothes that you wear, it could be anything that allows you to be self-expressed. So think about how vulnerability can help you speak your truth and be yourself, even in those atmospheres where you don't have complete control over how those things look. So but I think that's it. And if there's any other questions, let's just check the chat really quick. Obviously, this is a replay. If you have any questions, feel free to, if you're in the ASC, post stuff. You can obviously write it in this chat on this video, or we can continue the conversation as we continue this month of emotion for February. And one of the other things, if you are watching this and you're wondering, what is the Accountability Success Circle? We are a community of people who are motivated, positive, and driven to accomplish our own personal and professional goals. And we come together as a community to support each other in those goals so that we can all be super happy and super fulfilled with life. And if you want that, if you're craving that, I know that, there's so many different online communities that you can be a part of, especially during a pandemic like this. But if you're really looking for something that's positive, where you can allow yourself to be vulnerable, because we give uber permission to be vulnerable in our community and embrace everybody, no matter where you're coming from or what you're working on. And I encourage you to check us out at accountabilitysuccesscircle.com. And that wraps up webinar series number 18. We've been doing this for 18 months, so we'll be coming back in March with our next topic, and we'll be announcing our theme at the end of February. So see you next month, and thank you guys for who showed up live, and thank you for watching if you're watching us on the replay. Bye.
Yay. Thanks, Sophia.